So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I have never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind and probably always will. Makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad around the early 80s, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know. And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So, driving into the city, about a 2-hour or so drive out from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. She felt that they were getting on really well and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they had talked about was money and how he was pretty dang strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of a good deed done. Now I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid, how nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki would get this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she would tell me the next part. A week later she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in her car he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly, and treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. And to please, Nikki please, never, ever pick up another hitchhiker. Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. I was on my second week backpacking through Austria and I reached a point where I was too exhausted to walk any longer. It was an unusually hot day, I had blisters all over my feet, and I was ready to call it quits. I was in the middle of nowhere and decided to thumb a lift to the nearest train station. But I was out of luck. I stood there for what felt like hours and no car would pick me up. I don't blame them. I spent 2 weeks sleeping in the woods, my clothes were dirty and I probably looked like a maniac. When finally a truck pulled up, I didn't hesitate to hop inside because I was so thankful to be able to sit down and rest my feet for a while. I asked the driver if he could drop me at the nearest station so that I could catch a train to Vienna, but he told me that he was heading back there anyway and that he could take me there as long as I didn't mind him making a stopover to load the truck. I didn't, and so we drove along. We made some small talk and he seemed to be very polite. It was a pretty enjoyable ride until we reached the first stop. He loaded his truck while I walked around a bit and bought some water at a gas station nearby. He had offered me drinks a few times along the ride, but I always declined because I don't feel comfortable with that. I got back into the truck and we continued the drive to Vienna. Almost immediately after we took off again, he told me that it wouldn't be a problem for him if I wanted to take off some clothes since it was such a hot day. I told him that I was fine, but he brought it up a couple more times. He also asked me if I wanted to take a nap in the back and that he had several hitchhikers sleeping there in the past. I declined again and started to feel a little uneasy around him and planned to leave the truck at the next gas stop. All of a sudden he nearly yelled at me to put my head down and hide because he was driving past his stepfather's car and he didn't want him to see me in the truck. That struck me as odd, but I did anyway because his yelling took me by surprise. That confirmed my resolution to get out of there as soon as possible, and I asked him to drop me off at the next stop and made up an excuse that it was my goal to enter Vienna by foot and that I was rested enough to make it, thanks to his lift. He agreed and I got my stuff ready. He suddenly turned to me and said that I looked familiar and that he was sure he saw me somewhere before. I shrugged it off, but he insisted he remembered my face. He asked me if I ever went to a swingers club, because he was sure he saw me there sometime. That caught me off guard and I told him that this was impossible because I'd never been to one. "Well, do you want to? I'm going to one in Vienna. Let's go there together, I'm sure you'll like it." At this point I really wanted to get off the truck ASAP, and told him that I had no intention to come with him and asked him to drop me off now. He didn't answer but reached into his pants and started masturbating while he drove along. I froze up, clutching my backpack on my lap and didn't know what to do. I kept thinking that I'd jump off as soon as he stopped somewhere and tried to ignore what he was doing there since he didn't respond to my plea to let me out. A gas station was coming up and he stopped what he was doing and asked if we should take a shower together. I figured that there'd be people around and that it would make it easier to get rid of him, so I told him sure, why not. He pulled up and as soon as he stopped I yanked open the door and run across the parking area of the gas station hoping that he wouldn't come after me. He didn't, so I just kept running until the station was out of sight and I reached a busy street. Only after my heart stopped racing and I caught my breath I realized that I left my shoes at the truck. I walked the last few kilometers barefoot and kept a lookout for the truck until I reached Vienna. I was once hitchhiking in Pennsylvania. On this day, it was raining heavily, and I was wearing shorts and short sleeves. It wasn't raining the day before. This car pulled over. Female driver, 3 other female passengers. They asked me where I'm off to. My destination was Ohio, but I told them state border would be okay, as I noticed a government-issued tracker on one of their ankles, aka, they may be on parole. The driver said she had to pull for gas. We pull into a station. Driver gets out, starts pumping gas. Then, she opened the trunk. I heard a conversation between her and a male voice. I heard him saying, "Let go of me, you creep." Then, I heard gunfire. The other girls in the car just sat there as if everything was normal. The trunk closed. The girl went back to the pump, and hung up the pump. She got in the car, and we continued driving. Meanwhile, I looked back, and saw a guy on the ground bleeding. We pulled over again, this time the driver said she had business to take care of. We were on the side of the road, near a wooded area. All the other girls got off as well. The trunk opened again. I saw a shovel come out, as well as a black bag. Something in the bag was moving. Then, they disappeared into the woods. 2 hours later, they came back. And we headed back along our way. We then pulled down a dirt road into the woods. The driver parked the car. She turned around and looked me straight in the eye. She said to me, "You're next." I got out of the car and bolted. I found myself near the state border. I got another ride, this time it was a cab driver. I arrived at my destination. From that point forth on my trip, I always arranged for it. The scariest experience while hitchhiking is waiting for hours when nobody stops to take you in. At some point, you start to get desperate about the human race. However, at some point there is always someone to help you. Nevertheless, twice in my hitchhiking experience I had real doubts whether to get in this car or not. First time, it was in Italy, back in 2008. I was standing with my arms stretched somewhere around Rapallo when a white minivan stopped. Two absolutely savage faces looked out of the van. Long beards, disheveled masses of black hair, crazy eyes. Some white powder spilled out of the minivan. I felt afraid. And then suddenly a third face appeared. It was a dog. And he looked very friendly and nice. I forgot my doubts and took the ride. The two guys were sculptors and the white powder came from Carrara marble they were working with. They were extremely nice and obliging, and very interesting interlocutors to boot. They took me to Viareggio where I got really stuck, for more than 7 hours. Second time, it was less than 2 weeks ago. I was hitchhiking from Grenoble to Aix-en-Provence in France. It was long and difficult. I got stuck at a gas station near Orange where I tried to find a ride during 3 hours. Finally, there was a group of strange-looking people led by a one-legged man who told me they could take me further on the way to Nice. He was the only one able to speak some English. They told me they came from Bulgaria but they spoke some non-Slavic language, so I presumed they were Bulgarian Roms. It was just one car of 3 or 4 that traveled together. Perhaps I am more prejudiced than I fancied, but they looked very criminal to me. Had I not been absolutely desperate, I would probably not take a ride with them. But I had a couple aged 93 and 94 who were waiting for me in Aix, so I had to take this last chance of getting there before midnight. I did. And I was still saddled with doubts, for the whole road. They joked in their language, and those jokes, probably innocent, sounded sinister to me. However, they went into right direction. When approaching the last gas station before Aix-en-Provence, I reminded the chief that it was here that I wanted to get off. He calmly said, "I remember." When the car entered the gas station, I felt incredible gratitude and great shame for having doubted them, for having once again judged the people from their appearance. I said, "Thank you. I am very grateful. You are very nice to me." To which the chief responded in a very mafia voice, "'Tis only today. Tomorrow I am not nice. Those Rom guys really saved me." In few minutes, I found a young guy who was driving to Aix-en-Provence. I arrived at the home of my elderly friends at half before midnight. They waited for me.